Hi, welcome. We continue discussing the dairy farm benchmark. And remember what we said? You have to be able to divide your farm into various sections and be able to score how each of the sections is performing. If you have followed me, we have discussed many other sections. And now we now get into a new section of milking procedures and milk handling. Perhaps you may think that other sections are heavier and more important than others. Now, that could be true because issues like forages, fertility, are really the determinants of how the farm will perform. But again, milking is a very important aspect as it also explains or helps you understand whether your cows are comfortable when milking, whether they are going to be sick, have problems with udders and teats and so on, and whether you're getting enough milk from each cow, whether milk is being exhausted from the teats. So it's also a very important practice. And what do we check when you look at milk handling and milking procedures? One is, are your staff exposed to training about milking? When you get staff on board at your farm, were they milking where they were? Do they understand the procedures? Or are they having to learn on your farm? Very important that by the time they come to your farm, they have an understanding of how milking is done and why they do what they're doing. So that's very important. Are they exposed? Expose them if they are not. And if they are, check how they're doing it so that you can confirm that they're actually doing it the right way. Two is the udder cleaning procedures. The pre and post milking procedures. How is the udder cleaned? That again determines how often your cows will get sick, mastitis and other udder related diseases, which will cost your farm and may cost you culling, may actually cost you to cull some cows because teats are lost and the cows cannot produce as expected. So that's very important how the udder is cleaned. Three is the hygiene of the personnel who are involved in milking. You walk into a farm like that and you see workers coming from the cleaning of the barn, walking into the milking parlor and beginning to milk. Do they change their uniforms or their attire when going to milk? That's very important because it also determines how the final quality of milk is going to be. Do they wash their hands? Are they sanitized? Or how do they prepare when they are leaving other sections of the farm coming to the milking parlor, which is a very special place because that's where the product, the final product of the cows is produced. Four is the hygiene and the storage of the milking equipment and containers. This is also very important. Remember here, we are not just looking at the cows themselves. We are also thinking about who is this consumer who will be using this milk after this. And if this milk is contaminated at the farm, this can only get worse when the milk leaves the farm to the consumer. So we begin to be responsible and ethical and hygienic right at the farm level before the milk gets out. So it's very important to check how the containers are washed, how they are dried, and how efficiently they are stored before we go into the next session of milking. Now, five is the use and condition of the milking machine and the administration of clusters. Now, here we have to say that there are some farms that could be using hand milking. So there are no machines. Maybe the cows are fewer and they are still growing, and therefore they are not yet into machine milking. In that case, you need to check whether workers are actually pulling the teats or they are squeezing. Squeezing is the best practice and not pulling. Cows need to be comfortable when they are being milked. In fact, in the milking parlor, cows should feel like they're in paradise and not being harassed, yet they are giving you milk. But in the case of machines, is to train your workers on how to use the machine. How do they insert the clusters into the teats? At what point do they realize the machine is not working? Are they over milking and the cows are having to be stressed because of the irritation that is caused by over milking using the clusters? So very important that they are all trained and they are checked, they are assessed to see whether they are actually implementing what they have been trained. Now, six is a routine assessment of the udder for mastitis. This has to be a routine. It should not be something that your milkers or your personnel are having to think whether to do it or not. There should be a procedure that requires them to assess the udders for mastitis so that any cow that has any indication of mastitis at whatever level is treated, and so that that problem is stopped very early. When we have mastitis and no attention is given, then we are likely to get complications and we can lose milking, we can lose milk, or we can even lose cows through culling because of diseases that may affect the udder due to mastitis and other related conditions. Seven is the occurrence of mastitis cases. Now, there may be mastitis, not a problem, but then we should be able to minimize perhaps less than 5%, actually less than 5% of clinical mastitis is acceptable. But more than that, it means that we are becoming less attentive or actually negligent if the occurrence is too high. So we keep it 0 if possible, that's perfect. But again, if it has to be there, then less than 5% of the total herd size. Now 8 is the feeding after milking. There are some people who will, some farms who decide that let's feed the cows after milking, and others will say, let's feed the cows during milking. Now, whichever is your method, one thing that is most important is that after cows have left the parlor, there's a likelihood that they are going to lie down, especially the high yielders who get exhausted when they're being milked, they're likely to lie down. And if they lie down and the teats muscles have not closed, then we increase the possibility of getting infections at the teats and especially mastitis. So feeding the cows after milking as a procedure ensures that cows take a little more time before they lie down after milking, and then the teats have a chance to close, hence the feeding after milking, a very important practice. 9 is the milk handling by workers. So now we have finished milking, we have done everything okay, but then the milk is now here. Some farms will have milk lines, so the milk does not have to be handled by hand. It will get from the clusters into the buckets or into the pipes, through into the chiller and pasteurizer and so on. So it has no interference with the human hand. But in other cases, the milk may get into a bucket and has to be moved from one place to another. Now there, you have to check how your farm is performing. In some cases, the milk stays unattended for a few minutes. And what's happening? The bacteria are multiplying, the bad bacteria in milk. And therefore, we end up giving to the consumers milk that is already contaminated because of handling. So it's also very important to check how the milk is being handled by workers after milking. And finally, is the interval between the time we milked and the time we cooled the milk. Let's say we have facilities for cooling the milk at the farm, which is recommended. For a farm that aims for high quality milk, cooling facilities are important. But then after we have milked, how long do we take before the milk gets to cooling? If, for example, the milk is not being cooled at the farm and it has to be taken to another center away from the farm for cooling, then how long does it take? So we have to be responsible as a farm that we ensure that very little time, perhaps less than 1 hour, that milk takes between the time it is milked, it leaves the udder and goes to an equipment where it can be cooled, where cooling checks can be administered before it is then submitted to the market. So see you in the next lesson, and I'm happy that you're with me as we look at dairy farm benchmarking.